So it's my great pleasure to be invited to give this talk and to introduce you the concept of discrete choice experiments and how can we design and implement a discrete choice experiment using our programming language. So first, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Dr. Echo Shang. I'm currently a research assistant professor from the Department of Sociology and Social Policy at Lingnan University. So today we are going to talk about discrete choice experiments. I will split this lecture into two different parts. In the first part, I'm going to give you a brief description of what a discrete choice experiment is and how is it different from other traditional approaches of eliciting or understanding individuals' preferences toward a certain policy, a product, or service. And in the second part, I'm going to talk deeper into the different elements, different components involved in a discrete choice experiment, and what are the key steps that we could follow in order to design and implement a discrete choice experiment. And in the tutorial section, we will provide you with step-by-step instructions of how you can use different R packages and use R code to help you with the discrete choice experiments. So let's get started. First of all, I would like to talk briefly about what are preference studies. So because in the discrete choice experiment, our key focus is to understand the preferences, the values, or the key considerations that individuals have when they make choices, when they make a choice or when they make a decision about whether to choose product A or whether to choose product B. So these kind of studies are called preference studies, which are research studies that aim to understand people's preferences, their opinions, and their attitudes toward different products, services, policies, or even healthcare interventions, treatments, and so many other things. So these type of research methods, research studies have been applied to many different fields. For example, it has been used very often in market research, like when a company wants to understand consumers' preferences towards a particular coffee product or coffee brand, they may conduct a preference study to understand what are the key considerations of their customers, or what are the most important features of a coffee product to their consumers, to their customers. Moreover, for example, this kind of study has also been applied a lot in the healthcare research, trying to understand what are the values, attitudes, preferences of patients toward different treatment options, whether they prefer a more conservative treatment option or a more advanced but risky treatment option. This kind of preference studies could help generate some important and very useful insights to inform better decisions for healthcare providers. So, of course, as policy students, we also use the preference studies a lot in policy studies. For example, when policymakers, they want to understand citizens' preferences, their opinions, and whether they like a certain policy or not, they can also use preference studies to understand, to elicit individuals' preferences toward a particular policy scheme or policy initiative. For example, we can use this to understand what are the key considerations or are the most important characteristics that people value about the consumption voucher scheme, whether it's about the amount of the money they can receive, or whether it's about the channels where they receive the voucher, or it's more about the expired date of the voucher scheme. So this kind of study could help us understand how people make their decisions, how people make their choices. So Broadly speaking, we can classify different type of preference studies into two major categories, which include reviewed preference studies and stated preference studies. So these two are very different approaches based on different data sets and different data collection methods and with different implications. So I will briefly talk about the review preference study, and then we will talk more about stated preference study because this is the category that the discrete choice experiments belongs to. So first of all, what is review preference method? So briefly speaking, this method rely on the actual behaviors, the actual choices that individuals have already made in reality. We use the actual behaviors of these individuals to understand what they prefer, what they value, what are their considerations when they purchase a certain product or a service. So basically, these reviewed preference method observe choices that people have already made in the reality, in real world, what they actually have already done in the reality. And we consider that their preferences can be reviewed by looking into their actual behaviors. So just using this buying a milk product, buying a dietary product as an example. So let's suppose our research question is to understand which is the most popular product, what is the most preferred dairy products of consumers in Hong Kong. If we use a review preference method, then instead of asking individuals to state their preference, to indicate their preference, we will rely on their actual choices, their actual purchasing decisions to infer, to understand their real preferences. So using this approach, we can view individuals' behavior as a series of choices. So for us to answer this question, we can use administrative data, we can use sales records, which capture the real behavior, the real purchasing decisions of individuals to help us understand the preferences of individuals when they purchase a dairy product. So the basic idea behind the review preference method is that an individual's behavior can be used to understand their preferences. In most cases, we will choose the option that provides us with the highest level of utility or satisfaction. So by looking into their choices among different options, we can understand individual preferences and make predictions about their future choices. So that is the key idea behind this method. Our choices, our decisions are reflections of our own personal preference. So this method has a lot of advantages because it's based on actual behaviors, so it's relatively more accurate and minimize the hypothetical bias. And it also has a high face validity because in most cases, we will choose the option that generates greatest benefits or utilities for us rather than trying to go for an option that generates less benefits than others. But this method also has its own limitations, and one of the biggest problems, or not problems, or the limitations about this method is lacking existing data. Because sometimes we may not have collaborations with the restaurant, with the supermarket, or with the coffee shop, so we cannot get access to their sales records. Or sometimes when we want to evaluate individuals' preference or their attitudes towards a new product, a new service that has not yet been launched, being sold on the market, there is no such data exists. And moreover, this method also suffers from the problem of limited variance in attribute levels. Well, limited by the existing options, the existing products or services that are available on the market. If we want to study something that is not yet available, something that is not yet introduced to the market, we're not able to use this method because we cannot observe individuals' purchase choices, their purchasing decisions. And one final problem with this method is sometimes in the real world situations, the attributes or the characteristics of a product or a service are often highly correlated. For example, if we want to study people's preferences towards iPhones, we want to know which attributes, which feature is most important to them. If we use the review preference methods relying on the real products, their attributes are often correlated, like the price and the quality. In most cases, high price correlates with the good quality. It's very, very often that if we want to buy a high quality iPhones, we need to pay a relatively higher prices than other ordinary iPhones. So it's very difficult for us to isolate or to distinguish interactions using reviewed preference method. And this is how and why stated preference methods came into the picture, because these methods, stated preference methods, allow researchers to understand, to study individuals' preferences without actually requiring them to act accordingly. We do not need to rely on actual choices, actual behaviors of individuals to understand their preference. So how we do this? Usually we use survey with questionnaire format for us to elicit preferences by asking individuals questions. And we use normally we use a series of alternatives, and these alternatives could be products or services or interventions or treatments that are of our research interest, or any other type of choice item. It can be a coffee product, it can be a robot, it can be a treatment to cancer, or it can be a new policy that the government wants to launch. So it can be existing or even non-existing. So actually, stated preference methods refer to a family of techniques. It contains a lot of different sub-methods that all belong to this term. They all belong to this family, this big family of stated preference methods. So under this method, we have contingent valuation, in which we directly ask individuals, ask our respondents, how much they are willing to pay for a certain product, whether it's $10, $20, how much they're willing to pay. And on the other hand, we have another type of stated preference methods that is called choice modeling. So rather than directly asking about the monetary values that individuals are willing to place to assign to a certain product or service, in the choice modeling, we present our respondents with a series of different alternatives, or option A, option B, and we ask them whether they would like to choose option A or they would like to choose option B. So discrete choice experiments actually belongs to the choice modeling category, because in this method, in the discrete choice experiment, we ask individuals to choose the most preferred alternatives among different options, among different choices. By looking into how individuals make their choices, how individuals make trade-offs between different alternatives, we are able to understand their preference towards a certain product or service. So what is exactly a discrete choice experiment? So we can understand it as a quantitative quasi-experimental approach to understand how people make choices between different products, services, or other options. It's a method that helps researchers to measure the value that people place on different attributes of the product or service. So we call this as an attribute-based survey measure of value. So in simply speaking, discrete choice experiments involve presenting or demonstrating your participants or respondents with a series of scenarios that involve different products or service alternatives. For example, we can present them with coffee option A, coffee option B, and each described by different levels of attributes. For example, we can have a coffee option A that is very pricey but with very good flavor and good quality. And we can have a coffee option B that is very, very cheap, but the quality is relatively lower and the flavor is not as good as the option A. And we ask our respondents to choose whether they will prefer option A or whether they will prefer option B. So by asking respondents to choose between these different alternatives with different attributes levels, researchers, we can estimate the relative importance of each attribute in influencing the choice behavior. For example, we may eventually find out that our consumers, they value price much more than other alternatives, much more than other attributes. So they will always go for a cheaper option because they value the price, these attributes, these factor the most when they make their decisions. So this method has been applied to many, many different fields and to study different topics. For example, to understand individuals' preferences toward different job opportunities and understand consumers' opinions and attitudes towards new product or new service. Or it can also be used to understand individuals' lifestyle, how they make a decision about their transportations, how they choose a hotel, how they make a decision between different tourism, the traveling destinations. These are all very relevant and suitable questions to be answered using a discrete choice experiment method. So this method, the DCE method, is actually based on the assumption that in the reality, we cannot always have the best of everything. There always have to be some kind of trade-offs between different attributes. For example, if you want to have a very good quality and highly functioning iPhones, then you will need to pay high price for that. If you want to go for a low price iPhone, then the function must be relatively lower or less satisfying than the high pricey option. So in the reality, we have to make some kind of trade-off like this because we cannot have the best of everything. And it's also based on the economic theory of value, which assumes that individuals are rational decision makers. They are utility maximizers. We always go for the option that generates the greatest benefits or greatest utilities to improve our life, to improve our well-being. So by looking into individual choices, we will know which factors, which attributes we value the most, we prefer the most. So before we start talking about digging deeper into the technical details of how we can design or how we can actually implement a discrete choice experiment, there are some very important concepts that we need to first go through so that you can have a better understanding of what a discrete choice experiment is. The first concept is attributes. So we actually have been talking about this concept a lot in our previous slides. So attributes actually refer to the characteristics or features that are important to consumers when they consider whether to buy, whether to adopt a certain service or product or not. For example, when we consider coffee option A, coffee option B, there are some important features that we often take into the consideration, like the price, the origin of the coffee beans, whether it's a fair trade product or not, and the flavors, and of course the packaging, maybe it has a eco packaging or it's non-eco packaging. So these are very important characteristics about a certain product or a service, and we call these characteristics as attributes in a discrete choice experiment. And the second concept is attribute levels. So now we have different characteristics, different features about a certain product or service. Attributes levels refer to different values or variations in the attributes that can differentiate a product or service or intervention from others. For example, let's still take coffee product example here. Price is a very important attribute that we use to describe the coffee products. But under this attribute price, we can have many different levels. For example, we can have 3 levels, 50 Hong Kong dollars, 60 Hong Kong dollars, and 80 Hong Kong dollars. Or packaging is also a very important consideration to a lot of consumers. And under these attributes, we can have 2 different levels, eco packaging, or it's just normal packaging. By having these different levels under different attributes, we can have variations that help us to develop different alternatives or different products or services that will be combined or integrated into a series of choices to be presented to our respondents. And next is alternative. So after having attributes and attribute levels that we will use to describe a certain product, alternatives is an existing or hypothetical situation that we present to our respondents in a discrete choice experiment questionnaire. For example, now we have coffee beans A, we have this product here, and then we have different attributes that we use to describe this product. We have the price, can be 70 Hong Kong dollars per pack. The origin, this coffee bean comes from Colombia. The flavor is smoky flavor. Packaging is equal packaging. When we combine these attributes and attribute levels together, it helps us to describe this certain option, the coffee beans A. And this option is what we call an alternative that we use in a discrete choice experiment. And after we have alternative, now we need to combine this alternative into a series of choices that we present to our respondents. Usually in a discrete choice experiment, we will have 2 different alternatives or 2 different options that we present to respondents, option A or alternative A, alternative B. So here we have coffee beans A, coffee beans B. Each is described by 4 attributes: price, origin, flavor, and packaging, and with different values, with different attribute levels that differentiate these 2 different options. So this is actually the choice set that we usually present to our respondents. We present them to these 2 different options, and then we ask them to evaluate these 2 different options. So if you are a respondent, you will take a closer look at these 2 different options. A is 70 Hong Kong dollars per pack. It's from Colombia and the flavor is smoky and it has an eco packaging. For option B, it's much cheaper. It's only 40 Hong Kong dollars per pack. And it's from Brazil. It has the same flavor, smoky flavor. But for packaging, it's just normal packaging. It's not an equal packaging. And after presenting these 2 different options to respondents, we ask them which option they prefer, which option is more attractive to them. and they will make a decision about whether to go for A or go for B. And we will repeat this process for several times by changing the attribute levels here, changing the values under each attribute. And by repeating this process, repeating this procedure, we'll be able to collect sufficient information to help us understand what are the most important considerations that individuals have when they make a purchasing decision. So these are the key concepts about a discrete choice concept, about a discrete choice experiment, and we will talk more about the key steps involved in a discrete choice experiment in part 2. Thank you very much.